14 books, faithfully, every book. Kent has been here. We have loved having him. And before we start talking about this book, I will tell you that he has a new Cork O'Connor book coming in August called Tamarack County. And he has assured me that he will come back to sign it. And I'm thinking about pairing him up with Margaret Cole. Woohoo! So I think it's Buffalo Bill this time, or maybe it's, well, what is Margaret Cole's new book about? Do you remember? You're going to go look it up. He's skating gracefully back to his office. Ready to look it up. But anyway, it'll be wonderful.
It doesn't matter what it's about. It's going to be a good book.
It will be a wonderful book. So look for them at the end of August. And in the meantime, we are here to celebrate the publication of An Ordinary Grace, which, as I told those of you who read our e-news today, has been an April next pick, meaning independent booksellers across the United States nominated it as one of their top, is it 20 now, maybe? Anyway, their favorite books for April. So that's a real distinction. You must be thrilled.
I'm very, very happy. Anytime you get support from an organization like the Independent Booksellers of the United States, it's stellar.
And since this is the book of your heart, the book you've been itching to write for years, now it must really feel like validation for you, huh?
I'm just breathing a huge sigh of relief, basically. Sort of like giving birth to a child and having people go, you know, I don't know about you guys. To me, most babies aren't really very pretty. When they first come out. You gotta, but this one right from the get-go.
Maybe they're red. I'm working that in the rest of the evening.
I just want to say this. It doesn't matter what color it is. It's gorgeous.
That's really sweet of you. I wasn't actually fishing for a compliment. I want to go home with ammunition to win the fight. But why do you call this book An Ordinary Grace? That's a wonderful title.
Yeah, the actual title is just simply Ordinary Grace.
Oh, it is?
Ordinary
No and?
Grace. No and.
Okay.
Just Ordinary Grace. Well, here's the skinny on that. When I began writing the book, I had in mind the quote from Aeschylus, the playwright Aeschylus, that ends with the awful grace of God. And when I began writing the book, it was called Awful Grace. Boy, did that stink.
Probably wouldn't have won you.
Oh, I know, it was that off-putting. But as I began to write the story and I recognized what was really at the heart of it, which is all of the everyday blessings that we have and the ordinary graces that come to us, I thought, oh, there it is, Ordinary Grace. And so I thought it was a great title, but as soon as I thought of the title, I thought, at some point in this book, there is going to be an ordinary grace. So I love it when readers read the book and they come to that section and they shoot me an email.
Talk louder, please?
Oh, sure. I love it when readers have read Ordinary Grace and they come to the section in the book where there is in fact an ordinary grace, and they write me an email telling me what that meant to this vague, applicable title suddenly becomes something very specific, and I think I hope, very moving.
It is. I was just listening to the sound effect. If this were one of your
I know.
novels, we would have assumed that I'd arranged with a PD or whoever it is out there to wail away with the siren. But it was really pretty brave of you to step aside, you know, from the Cork O'Connor series to write a standalone. Publishers aren't necessarily thrilled with that idea, but you prevailed.
Well, I was pretty sure my publisher wasn't going to be thrilled with the idea because they told me a long time ago they wouldn't be thrilled with the idea. I wrote a book called The Devil's Bed many, many years ago. It was the fourth book I actually published. It was one of the other that is not a part of the Cork O'Connor series.
That was the presidential.
That's right. It was a standalone thriller. I thought it was a pretty good book. Came out to very nice critical reviews, but readers didn't buy it because Cork O'Connor wasn't in it. And as a result of that sales debacle, my publisher made it very clear that they only wanted to see Cork O'Connor novels coming to them from me from that point on. So when the idea for Ordinary Grace came to me and really solidified as a story that captured my heart, and I knew I was going to have to tell, I realized the risk involved. I realized I might be writing a manuscript that I simply couldn't sell, but I had to write the story.
I've talked to a number of authors recently doing that.
Yeah.
Jackie Winspear last night is settling Maisie for a moment and writing something different. Dana Stabenow, when she was here, 20 books into Kate, she's going to write an historical novel. I think there's a point in which authors in long-running series feel a need to challenge themselves or just do something different as kind of a like a sorbet, you know, between courses. I really encourage it. I think it's always improved the writing of authors who do that.
Well, I think when you accept the fact that you're a storyteller, it's like opening a door, and stories suggest themselves from all over the place. And not all the stories that suggest themselves to you and that are compelling stories will fit into the series that you're writing.
Right.
And so you have a choice of just stuffing them away or trying to find a home for them, trying to give them voice.
Right. And some of the stories, it's not just that they don't fit into the series, but they really don't fit the history of the characters that you've already given us. We know a lot about Cork, right, at this point. So you can't suddenly, like, divest him of all this history that we have in order to give him a story that, you know, fits what you want to write.
You know, I guess where I've come to is a belief that the Cork O'Connor series prepared me for Ordinary Grace. Because at the heart of the Cork O'Connor series is a really decent human being. And so I've surrounded him with ordinary people who they're flawed and they're searching and they stumble and somehow they end up coming to that right place in their lives. And I've tried with the Cork O'Connor series not just to write a good story, but to use powerful language in the telling of the stories. And so I think I find it was kind of a long apprenticeship, I think, is what I served. So that when Ordinary Grace came to me, I thought I was prepared now to write about these people in this place with the kind of language that would do justice to the story.
Well, you've always been interested in writing about young people. You've always, you know, in the Cork O'Connor.
Oh, I love it.
Lots of children, and lots of testing situations for parents has always been a key part. I mean, nobody's really safe except maybe Cork. Even me, we have to worry. In the Cork O'Connor series, since, you know, people have fallen by the wayside. I don't want to say any spoilers in case. Has everybody here read a Cork O'Connor book? Oh, okay.
Who hasn't read a Cork O'Connor novel? You can get out right now.
You can't leave the store without one. Now, we have to be careful sometimes. You know, I assume everybody who came is current, but we don't want to create a spoiler. But in any case, some characters in the Cork O'Connor series have died, or, you know, other things have happened to them. And I like that, the fact that it isn't a giant safety net stretched over everybody.
Well, when you write a series with a central protagonist at the heart of it, the truth is you don't get a lot of distance out of putting your protagonist in danger, because every bright reader knows that that protagonist is going to be there in the next book and the next book. So they know you're going to pull his ass out of the fire at some point.
Not going to drown in the boundary waters.
There you go.
Not going to go down with the boat in the lake. Not going to be burned up. Not going to die in the airplane.
But if you've read the Cork O'Connor series, you know that even though Cork will always be safe, everybody else that I put in jeopardy around him might not in fact make it to the end. And that's where the real suspense comes in.
And you've endangered his children. I mean, we could actually get him for child endangerment.
Yeah. His family's been through hell.
Yes, as a matter of fact. And, you know, and his friends, I thought the opening to your last one, I hope it was the last one, because they all blur in my mind, you know, into one giant wonderful story. But this is where the guy is dying.
Yeah.
Yep. Cork's lifetime friend, and he's got an arrow in him, and there he is. You know, that's a wonderful way to start a book, and then you have to find out, you know, not only how it got there, but how come Cork's just sitting there, you know, while it's all going on. I thought that was a marvelous concept.
Well,
I may like your book where they went to Wyoming the best in terms of the sheer surprise and all, and I won't mention what happened. But let's go back to Ordinary Grace and tell us what, in fact, it is you wanted to write. What is the story?
I grew up in a different time, and looking at all of you folks, I can see many of you grew up in that same period of time. You know, it really was a different time. It was a time when, for those of us at least who grew up in small towns, you would get up in the morning and have breakfast, and you'd say, "Bye, Mom," slam the screen door. She wouldn't see you again until lunch. Be gone again. They wouldn't see you again until dinner. Be gone again, and they'd have to call you in because it's bedtime, kind of a thing. Nobody worried about where you were going or what you were doing, and it was just a different. There was an innocence involved in that, and I wanted to capture that. Selfishly, I wanted to go back and nostalgically recreate that time for myself. Recall those elements that were important to me, and see if I could create them in a way that readers might be able to feel what I felt. One of my favorite books is a book called The Body by Stephen King. It's the book on which Stand By Me, the movie Stand By Me, was based. I love that book because I thought it captured so well what it was like to be a boy, 12, 13-year-old boy. And that's what I wanted to capture, was that 12, 13-year-old age. I don't know how it is for women, but for men, that's an important time for us because it's a threshold. We're right at the threshold of manhood. We've got a foot in our childhood, and we've got a foot poised to go into manhood, and we're not quite ready to make that step yet. And things that happen to us we seem to be more aware of, and they matter to us, and at least for me, remember significantly. And so those are some of the things that I wanted to capture in Ordinary Grace. The other thing was, if you're familiar with my Cork O'Connor series, you're probably aware that in most of the stories there's an undercurrent that deals with the spiritual journey. It comes very naturally for Cork O'Connor. He's a man with a foot in two different spiritual traditions, his white Catholicism and his Ojibwe spirituality. And so he's always trying to figure out where exactly his own spiritual path lies. And that's been an issue for me all my life. And so I was looking for a story that might allow me to deal more specifically with that issue. And Ordinary Grace was the story.
So, it would have been more difficult for you to have written this book if the child were a girl, wouldn't it?
I would never try that.
It just seems like, a logical statement, but sometimes authors really like to challenge themselves and write, another gender, but in truth, your memories are what it was like to be a 13-year-old boy, just as mine are, what it was like to be a 13-year-old girl. And
yeah, the story was challenging enough without trying to do that to it.
Right. So, there's a wonderful American tradition, Huckleberry Finn. Books like that,
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah, and even British, The Artful Dodger.
Yeah.
And so forth. Coming of age stories, I think have always, been, you remember Ursula, did you ever read Ursula Le Guin's The Earthsea trilogy?
I haven't.
Oh, it's a marvelous coming of age story, science fiction, or fantasy really, but absolutely marvelous. Look at Harry Potter.
Mm-hmm.
A sort of a giant, coming of age story.
It's interesting. It's very often described as a coming of age story, but when I was writing it, I didn't think of that. Wasn't what I was writing.
Right. But it's still a child on a journey.
Absolutely,
That's all.
absolutely.
Maybe there's coming of age is just a shorthand for them.
Yeah, I wanted to write about a family. I wanted to write about a place. I wanted to write about a time. And Frank Drum was the vehicle. Frank Drum was the conduit for the story. And so it is a coming of age story, but I always thought it was just so much more than just that.
Well, there are a million variants on coming of age, so I think you're right that it's really about a family and an ambience, kind of a Back to the Future in some ways. There's a lot of stuff that goes on there. Do you think it's really a Midwest story?
I hope it's a universal story. I hope that in the town of New Bremen, it doesn't matter where you grew up, you can identify the elements that make a small town, that make a community. Closeness, intimacy, nosiness, the fact that everybody's business is everybody's business, and there's a good side and a bad side to that. In the book, I think I make a statement something like, bad news travels with the speed of wildfire and the mysterious quality of the plague or something, because that's exactly what a small town. How many of you grew up in small towns? Yeah,
well,
you get
this. I don't know
this.
that a suburb of Chicago. Is this more family as you
It was a small town when you were there. We've all grown up along with our towns. It was an isolated kind of a place. You knew it. Winnetka.
Well, yeah, Kent, Winnetka actually figures into one of Kent's books, My Hometown. Remember?
Not in a good way.
No. It wasn't quite the Winnetka that I knew, but it was interesting. We did a program for the daughter of pitcher Lefty Gomez. Were any of you here for that evening? It was wonderful because she had lots of photographs and memorabilia of her father who was played for the Yankees, and he was the pitcher in the very first All-Star game, 1933 Chicago in Comiskey Park, and he won. And he was Joe DiMaggio's best friend, and he took the Yankees to Japan and all this other wonderful stuff. And somewhere in the course of that, I realized that we were talking about the White Sox, and I introduced the Cubs. And she gave me this kind of look. Now, she's younger than I am, but anyway, she gave me this kind of look, as so, seriously, a Cubs fan? And I said, and it really shocked everybody in the room, and I said, when I was 10, I used to walk up to, I would get out of school, in summer school or whatever, we'd go up, jump on the train on the North Shore, age 10, ride it down to, I wasn't allowed to go to Comiskey Park. It was a really dangerous place. Even my father didn't really want to take me to Comiskey Park to the ball game, but we were allowed to take the train to Wrigley Field. We'd get off at Addison, we'd go across, just kids, unescorted, whatever, and nobody thought anything of it.
Different time.
It really was a completely different time. I used to ride my bicycle all over, we used to go down to the beach all day when we were kids. We'd disappear before breakfast, ride our bikes to the Cherry Street Beach, Lake Michigan the whole day, and come home. Nobody ever thought anything about it. And you're entirely right that today...
The interesting thing is, I look back at I don't know what you did in all those times you were gone.
I was riding my bike.
Okay.
Wearing
Mom and Dad, I was riding my bike.
I was actually riding my bike.
Well, I think
we really were innocent.
Well, yeah, but I think back to all the things that I did, and I go, oh my God, I could have been killed.
Many a time. Or running into, there was a couple simple rules, like don't pick up hitchhikers. Well, that didn't count if you were riding a bike. But, like don't talk to strangers. But I remember a friend and I, we were out riding around the lagoons in the park way west of Winnetka or whatever it is, and there was some guy there, I don't remember, we joined him and we all talked. He could have, put his one under each arm and disappeared, and we'd never been heard of again, but it just wasn't like there weren't any real bogeymen.
I'm so glad you're with us today, Barbara.
Survived. I know. But we really did have a wonderful childhood that was not very fearful.
And it may not in fact be true, but the feeling I have is that we had a very special kind of growing up period that kids today simply don't have. They can't relate to. When our kids were growing up, I wouldn't let them do the kinds of things my folks let me do, because it was a different time and a different place.
I read somewhere that growing up in the second half of the 20th century in America was as good as it probably has ever been and maybe ever will be. And I think despite the wars and other things that have gone on, I think probably that was true. I look back at, I graduated from high school in 1958 and went to San Francisco, went to Stanford. And San Francisco was still a formal city. I remember my mother fretting that she wasn't wearing gloves when we went to the St. Francis Hotel for tea. I'm really serious. We dressed up to go to the symphony and all. When I left after I finished my master's in San Francisco in 1963, we were right there. It was Haight-Ashbury. It was the entire world. Rob is 5 years younger than I am, and his is the Haight-Ashbury world. We could be, seriously, 20 years apart in terms of our whole experience. He's Woodstock. He went to Woodstock. Rob would go to Woodstock. The whole bit. Well,
lucky him.
Yeah, that's. His music and mine totally different. Everything is just, and yet it's only 5 years.
Yeah.
So that's how much things changed. And you remember all those kids who were so upset at affluence and so worried, that felt so socially responsible, and were absolutely convinced that, it was only going to get better for everybody. And where did all that go? How fast did it go? We're just coming out of a recession, I hope, in which that's been blasted away, and now everybody has, a lot of anxiety that didn't exist.
Well, it's interesting, we're talking about this innocent time that I tried to recreate, but if you look at the time I recreated this place and the things that happened, there's a lot of not innocence going on there. In the course of this summer, five people died.
Yeah.
And so it's not just a story about innocence, but the loss of innocence and the wisdom that we all acquire. But there's a price for the wisdom that we get in life.
It's hard to remember that Brown versus Board of Education was 1955. Right in the middle of high school, all of a sudden. I went to a high school in which there were 2 black students out of 1,200, 1,500, something like that. Everybody was the same.
Yeah.
And last time I thought everybody was the same, Rob and I were in Canada, and we were in Prince Edward's Island on Canada Day, which, yeah, it's the 1st of July, I think. It's not, or maybe it's the 14th. I can't remember. Anyways, is it the 1st? Thank you. And I looked around at the audience, the people, the crowd and all the rest of it, and the guy on the mounted horse and everybody eating ice cream and, the fireworks and all. And I said to Rob, this is astonishing. I said, it's a time warp. I have dropped back 50 years. I could be home in Winnetka or in Evanston, Illinois. The last time I looked around and saw this configuration on a day when everybody was celebrating the same thing, their national independence, in the same way, in the same language, and we've become a multicultural, multiracial, multilingual society.
Oh, well, looking at this room, you wouldn't know that.
If you say this is Scottsdale, I'm going to whack you. No, but I mean, seriously, the world has really changed. I think, all of the analysis of the recent election has shown, how there was something I noticed about England the other day, where something I was watching and talked about London as such a multicultural city. Jackie Winsper and I last night, she introduced a woman from India into the Maisie Dobbs books. First time she's brought in a citizen from, out of the UK. She's written about gypsies and other things, but she actually has an Indian woman in a sari, beautiful image, walking along in this drab 1933, whatever it is, London. Then she's whacked into a canal, so it's not so great under that. But nevertheless, it's the first time in that series that you remember that Britain was an empire and had all of that going on.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going global. But back when you're talking about, didn't have all the internet, we didn't have all these things that have moved us in that direction.
It was the best of times.
And the worst of times.
One of the things that I liked dealing with an Ordinary
But no
Grace.
heads will roll, right? No
One
head diverge.
of the things I liked about Ordinary Grace was this is post-World War II, and everything was supposed to be so perfect, and all the veterans have come home, and they've all adjusted well.
Yeah, right.
That was the image that we had, and one of the things I liked about Ordinary Grace is I was able to talk about the real impact that World War II had on the men who went over and fought the battles for us. And they didn't come back the same people that they were before. So I was able to use Frank's father, Nathan Drum, the guy who goes away thinking he's going to be a hotshot lawyer and comes back wanting to be a minister because of what he's experienced there, trying to find his own way toward grace, because he's a very haunted man.
Yeah, and people didn't talk about it all that much.
That's right.
I know people, when I was a child, I had friends' fathers who, had been in service and never spoke about it at all.
Yeah, when I asked my father, so Dad, did you kill any Germans? His reply was, I shot at a lot of them. And he wouldn't go any farther than that. It was not an experience he cared at all to remember, to recall.
Well, I can see that the book really brought back tremendous memories to you.
Well, I mined a lot of my own life. There's nothing in the book really that is taken whole cloth from my own experience, but I mined my memories and my emotions and my impressions of the time. The closest in the book that I come to in terms of my own relationship are Frank's parents, Nathan Drum, who's a Methodist minister, and his wife Ruth, who is a very artistic woman who feels smothered by the role of a Methodist wife. And just, what back then mothers were supposed to do. You didn't go out and have a career. You didn't go out and really express yourself in the same way that men did. And that certainly was my mother, and that was kind of the relationship my parents had. And that's probably the closest I came to really pulling something from my own life.
So this is a small town. Inevitably, there are secrets. Well, you don't need to divulge them. At least this isn't a crime novel in the sense that you'll be a huge plot spoiler. But I mean, part of what goes on here are the secrets under this kind of tranquil life, and how everybody deals with that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's one of the great things about small towns is, boy, are there terrific secrets. In big city, I don't know, it just doesn't have the same impact.
Yeah, but there's also a sort of collusion, even though there are secrets, there's an amazing number of people in on the secrets, and what's amazing is, surprising anyway, is how many people keep silent, keep the secrets.
Well, they agree to maintain that image.
Right.
Yeah. Until something happens and things begin to fall apart and the truth begins to kind of bubble up.
It's often a child that's the instrument for that.
Yeah.
comes up a lot. I mean, that's a very southern novel kind of a thing, you know, small town with deeply gothic secrets, and then there's always some child that comes along and, well, I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird would be that.
Absolutely.
Or affects change, or you know, something of that nature. So do you think this is going to change your writing? You said this was all preparation. Writing Cork was preparation for Ordinary Grace, but do you think having read Ordinary Grace, then it will then inform your writing for Cork?
I certainly hope so. In fact, you know, I'm probably the worst judge of my own writing. I remember I sent Vermilion Drift off. It was a book several books ago. And when I sent it to my agent, I thought, okay, every writer in their career has to write a bad book. This is my bad book. You know, my agent loved it. My editor loved it. It got starred reviews right and left. I thought, okay, I'm not the guy to judge my own work. And after I wrote Ordinary Grace, my agent told me that the book that followed that, at least in terms of my writing, which was Northwest Angle, she said, I can clearly see the influence of Ordinary Grace on your writing now. So apparently, yes, it has affected me. I'm not really aware of that.
So you actually wrote this book before Northwest Angle, but it didn't get published in the...
It's been a long process. Yeah.
So when did you actually write it? How long ago has it been?
You know, when I look back at my journals, the first attempts I made to put anything down on paper was in the fall of 2007. And then over the course of probably 3 years, I wrote that novel. And then there were revisions to it at that point, and decisions made with the publisher about when it would actually come out. One of the things about writing a series is that you have a time slot when readers expect your next book to be coming out, and I'm a fall author. So the question was, would we substitute Ordinary Grace for the normal time slot in the fall when a Cork O'Connor novel would come out? Would we do something different? And we kind of went back and forth, and I thought we had it set, and then no, it changed. And so there were all kinds of decisions that finally had to be made before the book found a time.
Probably makes the most sense to do it as an extra in a year.
That's what we decided to do. But one of the things I'm hoping is now that if readers embrace a novel that's not a Cork O'Connor novel, that we can go ahead then and bring out a book in the same time frame that a Cork O'Connor novel would come out, but it's not a Cork O'Connor novel. Because honestly, I can't write 2 books a year.
Well, you didn't. You wrote this one over several years. Yeah, well, you know, that's really true. Writers all have different paces. Some people can write 2 or 3 books a year, and some people struggle to write a book every 3 years.
Well, I'm amazed at Stephen King, who just seems to, you know, pop them out.
Or Stuart Woods, who will be here, you know, later in April. I mean, he's doing 3 books a year now. John Sanford's doing 2. I mean, a lot of writers that really, you know, seem to do that.
Now, I will say this. One of the things that the writing of Ordinary Grace did for me was give me, I was able to give myself permission to begin to really think about other stories that I wanted to write. And I'm currently working on a project that I think of as a sister novel to Ordinary Grace. It's set in southern Minnesota. Cork O'Connor series is the Great North Woods. It's set in 1957, so we're going back to another time. And it's a book called This Tender Land. This Tender Land. And it's another one that deals with men who've come back from war, and really women, and how that has changed them. And it's also about land. I don't know if city people understand this, but Midwestern folks get this. The land is important, and in the same way that those who are farmers shape the land shapes you, and that's what this story is about.
Well, that's why I asked you, you know, whether this was a Midwest, because, I mean, you write about other things, but at heart, you really are a Midwesterner.
Oh, do you know, I really believe that if you've got the Midwest blood in you, it's always there. And you come to places like this to kind of get away from some of what winter offers.
And you find a pool of Midwesterners.
Yeah.
But you're always coming back to the Midwest. The Midwest is where your heart is. That's certainly true for me.
But it's probably true for Southerners
Yeah.
too. You know, people who grew up in, I'm sure New Englanders always carry, you know, some flinty part of New England bedrock around with them. I mean, where you grow up. I read something, and I think it's really true, that said the music we learn when we're young, you know, when we're teenagers, junior high, is the music we hear all the rest of our lives. And that is so true. I mean, you know, that really becomes like your music.
Well, that's because it was the best music ever written. Rock and roll.
You can understand it.
Yeah.
I can still sing Chubby Checkers. And when they had the, remember the Olympics finale, when they went through like the whole history of, Rob had to translate it all for me. I never heard of Queen. And then, seriously, I mean, you know, and then we were in Lausanne in the fall, and I came trotting back to the hotel where Rob was doing something, and I said, wow, I said, Freddie Mercury's down on the waterfront. And he said, I don't know where to be more amazed that Freddie's on the waterfront or that he even knew who he was.
Was he really?
Yeah, there's a statue of him.
Oh,
He was instrumental in forming the Montreux Jazz Festival, and he went there. But I mean, it was just a wonderful moment that, as I said, highlighted, you know, that 5-year gap between us, because, you know, I knew who the Spice Girls were. That was the only group that I could recognize, and the rest of it was all a complete revelation to me.
Well, I wonder about my kids who grew up, you know, in the time when 9 Inch Nails was out there. Thinking, what are they going to be nostalgic about? You know, what kind of music?
Yeah, I mean, all of that. It's fascinating. But anyway, my point is that I think where we grew up, you know,
Absolutely.
and whether, you know, it embraces like the music and the food and all the rest of it, really does inform us and stays with us all our lives.
Well, and we can all relate. I think that's why a story like To Kill a Mockingbird, you don't have to live in the South to appreciate that story. Or The Body, you don't have to live in Maine to appreciate that story. We're talking about universals here.
Well, it's the specific that becomes a universal, and that's really the magic of a novelist who can do that, because otherwise if it just stays really specific, it doesn't achieve that. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody can write a book set in a place and make it a universal. So I think you know, this great gift that you have shown us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Would you like to ask for questions?
Yeah. I'd like to ask for questions. Anybody have anything they want to ask? This lovely lady sitting right here.
In black.
Yes. And I was going to go for burnt orange. But you chose for some of the kids in the novel to have some special needs. And why did you choose to do that rather than just have them be your average, you know, little kid? I mean, the stuttering,
the stuttering Ariel who was born with a
cleft
hair lip.
Yeah.
I haven't the slightest idea. That's how the story came to me. That's how these characters came to me.
But you've written about people like down on the Indian reservation in the Court of Connor. You've dealt a lot with, you know, people who have been damaged all along.
And who have had to overcome this you know, obstacle in their lives. And I really wish I knew where that came from. So much of Ordinary Grace, you know, I talk about wanting to recreate a particular period of time and elements from my past and all of that. But in the end, Ordinary Grace really was a grace to me. It came as a blessing to me. And so much about the story I really didn't understand while I was writing it. It was just there. And when I looked, it was one of the easiest pieces of writing that I've ever done. Every day I went to the typically when I write a Cork O'Connor novel, I think the story through from start to finish, and in as specific detail as I can, because a mystery is a very tightly woven construct, and everything depends on everything else. And that wasn't Ordinary Grace. And so I often went to the coffee shop to write in the morning without any really clear idea about how the story was going to reveal itself to me that day. And what a pleasure that was, because I never doubted that it was going to be the right thing. I mean, at some point it was just coming. It was just coming.
If you were from a different culture, you would call it a mitzvah. A word I have learned. I speak more Yiddish than Rob, but...
You know, hopefully I'm going to be doing an event here with Margaret Cole when Tamarack County comes out at the end of the summer.
I'll make it work out.
And one of the things I love about Margaret is, for those of you who don't know Margaret's work, she writes the terrific Wind River, series dealing with the Arapaho in Wyoming. And she told me once, she said, the Arapaho have this belief. They believe that stories exist out there in the universe, and they choose the storyteller. And that's exactly how I feel.
That's a wonderful idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. I'll remind her.
Okay. What else? Other questions? Yeah.
I haven't read your new book. We have it, but we've read all the Cork O'Connor, but it sounds to me like it's a bit of autobiographical. In other words, it's a story that you felt compelled to tell, and it took you this much time because you were so used to a structured.
Mm-hmm.
So is that how you think about it too?
Yeah.
That's a good insight. It really is.
It was the first book in a very long time for which I had no contractual obligation. There was no deadline. There was no expectation. I couldn't even be sure I could sell the manuscript. It was simply a story I wanted to tell, and it came to me and needed to be told, and that's what I was involved in. I hope to God it's, I love writing the Cork O'Connor series, absolutely love writing the Cork O'Connor series, but it's always a different experience for me. And I'm hoping at some point that I have the same experience with a piece of writing that I had with Ordinary Grace, that feels that intimate, that easy.
It may only come to you if you're not actually on deadline.
You know, that may be. In fact, we just negotiated a new contract with my publisher, a 3-book contract.
Yay.
2 more Cork O'Connors, and this Tender Land. And I was very reluctant to include this Tender Land in the contract because I wanted very much the experience of writing it without any pressure. And then my agent very wisely pointed out to me that, well, if Ordinary Grace tanks, you might want to have the book already bought.
How pragmatic. But actually, that's the experience of writing a first novel over 25 years. I have had so many authors talk about, how easy it was to write a first novel, especially because you're not sure anybody will ever read it, or if it will be published.
You have all the time in the world.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, there they are, and expected to write a new book in a relatively tight time frame and all. And various authors that I, like you, we have a long history together. They've been here many times, many books, have begun to say that they would like the freedom of no deadline. Early Fowler was one of them, Dana, Jackie, a bunch of other people.
Well, Lahane, after he wrote Mystic
Right.
River, said, no more deadlines for me, and he's kept to that.
Yeah, and so it probably does give you more freedom, in terms of not having to. I mean, occasionally, I remember once I asked Robert Barnard, one of my favorite authors of all time, a great British author, and he had written this book, had terrific, just great concept, and it was rolling along. All of a sudden, from absolutely nowhere, the IRA showed up on the ship. I didn't even know how they got there, rowboat or something, and that was the end of the case. And I said, Robert, what was that? And he said, I was on deadline. I just didn't know how to end it. That really can't happen to you. You can get away with it once, maybe. Any author can once, but you can't do that as a general practice without your readership falling off.
Well, when you're writing a series, it's much easier to meet deadlines, simply because you've already got the foundation for everything. People know your characters, they know the place, they know the kind of, so you don't have to go back and recreate the wheel every time. So I seldom have difficulty meeting a Cork O'Connor deadline. That said, it would be nice sometimes not to have to write to a deadline, because who knows what when I was talking with my agent about the fact that I didn't want, for this Tender Land, I didn't really want to be bound by a deadline, and finally we negotiated it, and I said, okay, what I'd hoped for was the ability to recreate the experience with Ordinary Grace. I don't know that you can do that. And life's an adventure, so what the hell? Let's see what happens,
This gentleman had a question.
I was just curious, was the Devil's Bed a contracted book? Were you on deadline for it? Or?
No.
And what was your experience then? What were there similarities in the relaxed approach towards the book?
It was
I
very,
really enjoyed the book.
Yeah, but again, it was a book with a very tight construct. It was a thriller. And so pace was important, and intrigue and suspense and all of that stuff. I rewrote that book more significantly than I've rewritten any other novel, because I was trying something new, a standalone thriller. What was this going to be like? And at the end of it, I think I did a pretty good job. I really do. But it wasn't an experience I wanted to have again. You know, I've done my standalone thriller. I'm not going back there because it wasn't really what I enjoyed doing. I like the Cork O'Connor stuff. I like Ordinary Grace, This Tender Land. That's more me. Yeah.
A couple of times you've made a reference to the beauty of the language in this book. And as an English teacher, I like that. I like to hear that.
Son of an English teacher, I still am.
Did that come as easily as the story? And did that love of the language, thinking like that, did that carry over to your real life and you would go, this piece of toast, it's, you know, and you would, you know, did it affect you as an individual, not just as a writer, but with Diane in the mornings?
Yeah, did I talk any different, Diane, after or while I was writing Ordinary Grace? No. I was still the same old schmuck I always
did it come as easily as the story?
The language did. The language and the story were inseparable for me. When I heard Frank's voice.
And that's talent, Kent. Thank you for that.
Oh, what did you say?
You Why don't you repeat it for the microphone?
For the microphone, she said, that's talent.
Thank you for that.
And thank you for that. Yeah, over here.
In the Corcoran O'Connor series, you do I think such a good job of weaving in some of the Native American culture. Is that something that's in your family or something that's been an interest of yours forever?
Yeah. For those of you who couldn't hear, the question was, in the Cork O'Connor series, I weave in a lot of Ojibwe cultural information with the story itself. And is that because I have Native blood in me, or that I'm somehow associated with the Native community? I have no Native blood in me whatsoever, and I didn't know anything about the Anishinaabe until I decided to include them in my series. And I have done since that point in time a great deal of research to make sure I get it right, but that's it.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that Minnesota is a border state. You know, we sometimes think, you know, in Arizona, clearly we have a southern border that is challenging, but we often forget that Minnesota is the northern border. Well, it doesn't have all that drama.
I don't know.
Are pretty
Yeah, you gotta watch out for those Canadians.
A lot of them made it all the way down.
They didn't make it to Winnetka, so floating down the Mississippi and the Illinois River or whatever it is. But no, but I mean, it really, I thought Boundary Waters was particularly good with that. The idea that, you know, for the Indians anyway, that border is a purely artificial construct. You know, their nation. Peter Bowen used to write like that about Montana, you know, the Red River thing and going back and forth. And we have that same thing in Tucson. The Tohono and the Yaqui, you know, weren't necessarily recognizing our southern border at all. There's a little community of them here in Phoenix, and then if you go down to Tucson, you know, the beautiful cathedral there, what do they call it, the Dove of the Desert, I think. There's an actual Yaqui market, you know, that is all around it. So I think it's great that you remind us in your books that Minnesota is a border state, and it does have Native Americans who have a different construct than we do.
Well, yeah. What does a border mean when, you know, your whole existence has been go where you need to, go where the game is, go where the water is, go where the and even now, you know, you have families on both the Cree on the other side of the Ottawa. They are all Anishinaabe basically.
Right.
And I touched on that in Boundary Waters and in Northwest Angle and in Thunder Bay. The fact that the experiences have to do with the land and no stupid imaginary border that politicians have said.
Well, Maine's a border state. I've always been indebted to Jerry Boyle, who's from Maine. I read some wonderful books about Maine and the fact that it too is a border state and a lot.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's just sort of luck that some of it's Canada. I don't mean luck, but just the way it turned out, fate. That some of it is Canada and some of it's America, but it wasn't.
Yeah, it was a lot of negotiation over corn liquor, as I understand. To set that boundary.
Yes, sir.
Curious, you'd say a little bit about writing in a public place And also, are you still writing in longhand?
Yeah. The question was, could I talk about writing in a public place, because I write in coffee shops, and writing longhand because my first 9 novels were all written longhand. I'll tackle the first one first. I've always written in coffee shops, and that was because when I first wanted to get serious about my writing, my wife was in law school, and I was the sole support of the family and had to keep a roof over our head and food on the table. And I realized that if I wanted to incorporate being a writer somehow in my life, I had to find a way to do that and still meet my responsibilities. I was living a block from a wonderful cafe called the St. Clair Broiler in St. Paul that opened its doors. You know the Broiler? Yeah, okay. Opened its doors at 6 a.m. in the morning, so I would show up there when they opened their doors. I had my notebook and a pen, because this was long before they had laptops or anything electronic that you could take with you. I would sit down, get my coffee poured, open my notebook, and begin to scribble. And I did that for about 20 years. I wrote at the Broiler that way. Yeah, it was a public way of doing it. And even after then, I became associated significantly with the Broiler. I did a lot of media events there, interviews there, photos taken there, all of that. The thing that I appreciated was that everybody who came in and knew I was a writer and that this is what, were very respectful of my need for that space. They would come over to me occasionally and say, "Mr. Krueger, I just want to say I like your work, and would you mind signing a book for me?" Well, yeah. The people at the Broiler who were difficult to deal with were the regulars, the guys who were there every day and who would plop themselves across the table from me and proceed to tell me some inane story that they were sure I was going to want to use in one of my books. But the writing in the coffee shop, I can only write now in public places, because if I try to write at home, it's just way too quiet. Honest to God, I've had this experience. I've been at home with the house to myself, beautiful winter day, snow outside, sun. It's exactly the kind of atmosphere you would think would be conducive to the creative process. And what am I doing? I'm sitting there going, shouldn't the furnace have come on by now? It's too quiet. I'm so aware of everything. In the coffee shop, it's all just white noise to me, and I can sink myself into what I need to do and then resurface whenever I have to do that. And I love that, absolutely love that. I don't write at the Broiler anymore, but I still do all my writing in the coffee shop. Longhand, that was how the process developed for me because there weren't laptops. And I could take my notebook anywhere with notebook and a pen. You know, how much simpler could it be? But a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I was way behind deadline, and the process of writing longhand requires that you transcribe everything then to the computer, so that draws the time frame out. I needed to get it done more quickly, and so I thought, okay, let's see if I can do this. And I found that in fact the process still works pretty well this way. So I don't write longhand anymore. But my first 9 novels were all written longhand.
Do you read your work aloud to yourself?
Absolutely. Most of the writers I know do at some point read it out, because you hear so much that your eye doesn't catch. You hear cadence, you hear wrong words, you hear all the miscues that are there. Yeah, we all do.
You even hear commas.
Yeah, where they should be.
That's right. Whenever your voice drops, it's a comma. I try telling that to my authors quite often when they seem completely baffled by this simple concept. I say, read it aloud. Whenever your voice dips, write a comma.
Yeah, Bleakley.
With Ordinary Grace, it seems to me as though the publisher is treating it differently than Cork. When I go on any site, anywhere, Atria, Simon Schuster and Atria, they have a really nice website for you with all kinds of links and things that I wasn't aware of before. It seems to me as though they're promoting this book and This Tender Land differently. Their hope being that, I mean, you are a New York Times author already, celebrating. But I think they're hoping that this is going to be the fire in the rocket or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure that it's really that so much as it's just a different, they're looking at a different audience in a different way of selling the book. And so they're trying something different. But I will also add, because I always try to thank all of you for coming to our events. You mentioned that he is a New York Times bestselling author, and he is. And the reason is all of you people sitting here in this room who came down here tonight and bought a book. Because that's how the New York Times bestseller and all bestseller book, lists work, is then bookstores like mine count the books we sell, and then we report to them. I have a wonderful ongoing dialogue with the people who do the bestseller list at the New York Times, because I'm always writing them notes. Because some of our sales are so enormous, I write them little detailed notes, and I'll say, this is a real figure, not a typo. Clive really did start his book tour here, or Sue Grafton was, and you can go watch it, I say. So verisimilitude, reliability, and all enters into it. But that's really how it works. So all of you who are fans, you have contributed, to Kent's ongoing career and to him being a best-selling author by doing this. So he and I both thank you, because otherwise we'd get together, but we wouldn't do it here, would we?
Yeah, thank you very much, but don't expect any of my royalties. No, it is true. It is true. And it is true that for authors like me, for the most part, it's the independent booksellers that spread the word about our work. A publisher can do everything he or she, they can pour money into a book, and that doesn't mean that it's going to be a successful book.
Well, sometimes it does. Look at the Da Vinci Code.
Well, it has to be embraced really by booksellers, I think. There are anomalies. It has to be embraced by booksellers before it gets there. And Cork O'Connor, the Indies have just been so kind to me, and I'm so grateful. And now with Ordinary Grace, which is a very different kind of book, my publisher, I think, is trying to reach a different audience than my Cork O'Connor novels would reach. And what I'm hoping comes from this is people will discover me, who wouldn't normally read a mystery, will discover me with Ordinary Grace and think, well, maybe I should give that guy's other books a try. And they'll discover that the Cork O'Connor novels are mysteries that I think are pretty good.
There was a time when actually there might have been pressure on him to change his name for this book. Ruth Rendell.
I was thinking
Barbara
Stephen King
Vine.
for a while.
Sorry. No, but I mean, it used to be that when an author's name became a brand for a certain kind of book, if the author read something different, then oftentimes the author would change names. Elizabeth Peters wrote as Barbara Michaels, and Ruth Rendell writes as Barbara Vine, and guys do that and whatever. I think increasingly in an internet age, you can't really do that, and so there's more freedom to write different things and stick with your own name, especially if it has become a brand.
But then it is a risk.
Yeah.
You're taking a risk.
Right. But see, I've often thought The Devil's Bed, you just published it too soon.
Do you know, I have a sense too.
I think if you published it later when your name was more of a brand, more people would have accepted it. I don't think that it was necessarily about the book, but may have been more about the timing.
Yeah, and it was also about things going on at the publishing house. I lost my editor. There was no champion for the book. It had no support in terms of publicity and all of that. So there were a lot of factors involved.
And the fact that your books are still all in print. Not every author, has the luxury of his entire backlist, all of his earlier books, still available. And now that we have digital publishing, it's also an opportunity for readers, at very low cost, to come in early on, try Iron Lake, for example, read it and become involved in it. So The Devil's Bed may, I know your agent's over here, so I'm speaking that way. Not that you need my advice, but The Devil's Bed may turn out to be better in digital, with a push in that direction. It's something you can, there's a lot of stuff
The business is just so unpredictable these days. There's a question over there.
What sparked your idea for the first Cork book, and was that a hard book to get published for you?
Actually, it wasn't. Getting an agent was the most difficult aspect of that. Iron Lake, I wrote Iron Lake over about 4 years, and I began Iron Lake as a result really of a midlife crisis. My father, the high school English teacher, at 18 years of age, when I was 18 years old, he insisted I read Ernest Hemingway. I fell in love with that guy. I fell in love with his work and with the image of Ernest Hemingway and all of that. And so for 20 years I tried to be Ernest Hemingway. I tried to write the great American novel as Ernest Hemingway might have.
He came to a poor end.
Well, yeah. And I didn't want to go there.
Red.
When I decided it was time to try something else, I looked around me to see what people were reading, and they were reading mysteries. So I thought, I'm going to give mysteries a try. Didn't know anything about mysteries. My father, the high school English teacher, raised his children on literature with a capital L. I didn't even read the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew growing up. So I started reading mysteries and discovered that I had a completely incorrect idea of mysteries. I had the snobbish view of mysteries, and when I began to read them, I realized they were well written, they were compelling, they were wonderful stories, they were socially relevant, all of these things. And so I sat down and began to write then Iron Lake with that understanding in mind.
And that landscape in mind.
Yeah.
You know, it was really interesting. Kent published Iron Lake almost virtually at the same time that Steve Hamilton published his first book, A Cold Day in Paradise. I read them practically back to back, and it was just amazing. I mean, here I was in, Minnesota, and here I was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan with these two marvelous starts.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know Steve Hamilton's work, he writes the Alex McKnight series, among other things, set in the UP of Michigan, and he also deals significantly with the Ojibwe.
He does. He'll be here, our July conference at the Biltmore. Steve will be back with a new Alex McKnight.
No, he's a terrific author. If you don't know him, you should.
But they're really fun to read. If you've read Kent and haven't read Steve, I really recommend that you go back and get A Cold Day in Paradise and read forward, because there's a lot of similar stuff. You guys were like a little tag team all the way through that year. He won an award, you won an award, he won an award, you won an award. It was wonderful.
You know, it's interesting. A lot of the people who published their first book the same year that Steve and I did. It was a big year, but a lot of them aren't publishing anymore.
That's right.
Somehow Steve and I have managed to survive. Thank you, Lord.
I think a lot of it is because the landscape is such a character in your books.
Yeah.
You know, it isn't just the people, because they are great, but it's really, you go there. I mean, it does become that I know more about Minnesota as a result of reading your books than I would ever have learned otherwise.
Yeah, Tony Hillerman. That's what I learned from Tony Hillerman.
A classic, right?
You write a profound sense of place. You take people to a place they don't know well, and you give it to them so that when they finish reading your book, they feel like they've been there. And certainly it worked for Tony, so what the hell?
But he had to ignore his editor's advice, which was lose the Indian stuff. Seriously, yeah. No, because nobody was really writing books like that, and while they liked his story, they thought that no one would want to read about the Navajo. So that really was the letter he got back, was, great story, lose the Indian stuff. And that was in the 70s, because I read Tony, all the way through. I mean, Robert Parker Spencer, it's all, it's Boston. Boston is just as big a character.
James Lee Burke, Dave Robichaux.
Montana or Louisiana.
C.J. Fox and Craig Johnson, Wyoming. Regionalism really...
Dana, Alaska, whatever,
Regionalism used to be kind of a pejorative term that was applied, and now it's a wonderful thing. People love to read about stories set in these what they do. What New Yorkers at any rate consider exotic locales.
New Yorkers can't see Wyoming over the Hudson. That's part of the problem. But what's really interesting is that regional books have really caught on in Europe now. C.J. Fox is an enormous bestseller in the UK. Craig is a huge bestseller in France. Diana Gabaldon, who writes, the Scottish. Germany is a giant market for her, so...
I'm big in Luxembourg, as I understand.
Is anything big in Luxembourg? I love Luxembourg, it's really fun. No, but I mean, I do think it's intriguing that, with the globalization, like we've all been reading the Scandinavian, all these Nordic books and so forth, but it's not a one-way stream, it's Nordic and Italian and other things that come here, so we have exported. But we're so big that instead of it being like Norway, it's Wyoming, But I mean, try and remember that Arizona's bigger than the entire British Isle. You can drop all of it into Arizona with room to spare. And yet, as Dana pointed out, you can drop Alaska on top of the United States, and it overlaps both coasts and both borders. And it's a state. I mean, think about it, how huge it is. And there are 255 state troopers for it. That was the one that really
Boy, can you get away with a lot there.
Serious crime waves, possible. And, well, assuming you could mush, whatever. But I mean, just think about the geography of it, So I think even for Americans, reading books about other parts of America is fabulous.
When computers came in and the digital came in, you know, everybody says hardcover books are gonna be dead. I don't see it, I mean,
I think it's paperback books, especially mass market, under more assault by digital. It's, you know, a digital book is a text file. It's not a book, and there's no margins, you can't, you know, it's all a different deal. It's like a scroll. You know, the library at Alexandria that we hear about was destroyed. It wasn't full of books as we know them. It was full of scrolls, you know, and you had to remember the old fax machines where it rolled out and you had to cut it apart and all the rest of it. And I think that digital has terrific value for, it's cheap, it's portable, which is what mass market books were about. It allows backlists to be republished, it's great for short stories. I mean, there's a ton of stuff that works out well, but a hardcover book is a hardcover book. You know.
but they're both still tracked, right? I mean.
Oh, yeah.
They are, and I've always said that the market would probably average out at about, level out at about 40% for digital and everything. I've never assumed.
And you're in fact seeing that.
We are seeing that. And the other thing is, I mean, let's be really blunt, you know, this is an evening's entertainment. Your cost of the book is roughly the same as if you and a friend or spouse went to the movies, except you get to take the book home, and when the movie's over, Rob and I went to see something recommended by the Republic. I'm trying to remember what it was, the Wreck-It Ralph. And neither of us could translate it, so we dropped our, you know, $20 or something and went into Harkins to see Wreck-It Ralph, and after 15 minutes we said, we're not in the game culture, we don't even know what's happening here, and we left, and that's $20 we'd never get back. Whereas if it's a book, you know, for slightly more, you can read it, you can give it to somebody, you know, there's so much that you can do with it.
You know, it's a significantly different experience with an electronic reader and a book. You know, you can love a story that you find on your Kindle,
Sure.
but you have a love affair with the book. It's a sensual experience.
You
know?
can flip it, you can, you know.
Smell the, you know, crack open that book for the first time, there's a smell that comes up. The pages kind of whisper to you, and, you know, beautiful cover.
And you can move back and forth. Think of what a genius move it was to actually cut apart a scroll and sew it together to make a codex. You know, that is one of the great technological advances, you know, that has made, just transformed things. And digital, you know, is great. It also presumes an uninterrupted supply of electricity. And when we were in Peru and had to be airlifted out, remember the flood in 2010? Rob and I were there, and we spent a week in Cusco because we couldn't get to Machu Picchu. But they were evacuating people by helicopter, but they could only bring like 30 people back a day from Machu Picchu because it was so damaging and all. So I took to going down to the Cusco main square where they brought out the statue to run it around and try to stop the rain. I mean, the Black Jesus, that was great. But anyway, so I would be there when the helicopter would come in. All these disgruntled people would get off the helicopter, and I would say to them, how'd it go? And do you know what their universal complaint was? None of them had taken anything to read, and the few people that had Kindles, there was no electricity and the batteries died. The few people that had a paperback with them were the happiest people. Seriously, and they shared them, you know, because think about it, if you were in a place for 5 days with absolutely zero to do, you know. So that really reminded me of how, you know, so I never go anywhere without an actual book. Yeah, there we go. Now, we've wandered afield. Thank you for your patience, but I think, does anybody have a final question that they would like to ask?
Because I'm never coming back, despite what
Do you have any words of wisdom as a real literary agent that you would like to contribute to a discussion which we've completely ignored you throughout?
Goodness, on what topic?
This, folks, this is my agent, Joanna McKenzie.
That's right.
My terrific agent.
Other than everyone should pick up Ordinary Grace and read it. And buy every...
As an agent, do you have a different viewpoint about, you know, any of the stuff we've talked about?
No, I think in terms of ebooks, definitely spot on. You know, we always say in the office that we're in the business of content. You know, we represent people with talent, like Kent, who provide content, which is what publishers want. So I don't feel like how it's disseminated, you know, we worry about it, of course, because we want people like Kent to be properly compensated and acknowledged for their work and talent. But for me, however people read, I just want them reading.
Yeah.
But the only current economic model that allows author events is actually buying books. Now, we're gonna make that nice for you, because those of you who actually bought books, got a book with a number in it, and so we're gonna give away 2 books this evening. 22? Okay. So the first book, speaking of global, is by Ann Holt. Notice I've selected your publisher as the publisher.
Smooth move.
Yes, I thought there was some grace there. This book is published in June, and she was an Edgar finalist. This is the 3rd book in her police investigator, Hannah Wilhelmsen. I cannot pronounce it in the Norwegian style, so I'm going to call her Hannah. It isn't. Just like Joe Nesbitt was actually something I totally can't pronounce, like Nesbitt or something. At a foster home outside Oslo, a 12-year-old boy, notice the relevance here, is causing havoc. The institution's steely director, Agnes, sees something chilling in the boy's eyes, sheer hatred, when she's then found murdered at her desk, stabbed to the back with an IKEA kitchen knife. Olaf is nowhere to be found, and the case goes to Hannah. She's a terrific writer, and she's a bestseller in Norway. So would you like to pick a number between 1 and 22? For
17.
It's you. You're good about Hannah then. All right, now my other book, which amazingly enough is also published by Simon & Schuster, publishes in August, and it is called Multiple Exposure by Ellen Crosby, who's one of my favorite writers. I knew her when she was a correspondent in Moscow and wrote kind of a spy thriller, but then she moved back to Washington, D.C., and she wrote a number of books about a Virginia winemaker. So whenever we have, as we always did, Ellen for an event, we served a lot of wine. It was terrific. Anyway, she's kind of gone back to her roots, and she has a new series with a savvy female photographer whose husband's abduction embroils her in the world of international espionage and lost Romanov treasures. Fortunately, I was in St. Petersburg for a week in December, testing out whether my new knee could survive cold, and I'm here to tell you, no.
No?
Not with metal in your knee. It's really ugly when it's 17. But anyway, we have a lot of pictures of Romanov treasures now, so when she comes on August 20th, in fact, to do her event, which is, I'm happy to tell you, the day before Frederick Forsyth is going to visit us. Am I excited? Yay. I know, but I mean, it's
Been a while. When was his last book out?
I don't know, but he's never
Yeah.
been here, so,
Okay.
you know, I figure it's way cool. Anyhow, we'll do some sort of event showing things, because we have a big TV and we can show you, we could really make this theater. So I need to pick a number between 1 and 22 that isn't 17, right?
Yeah.
11. Oh, you missed it, huh? You have to be here to win. No 11? Nobody's claiming 11? I'll drop down to 10 then. What, are you number 11?
I'm 10.
Well, you just
Could
got...
have been Bonnie because she bought the book, but she didn't get one of these.
Well, I just dropped it to number 10, so I'm going to hand it to you. And I'll let the 2 of you duke it out. Actually, you can illustrate my point. You can share it. One and then the other. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming this evening.
You guys can find
What?
it.
Credit card, EID.
Right here, Bonnie.
Somebody lost a credit card, right. This is one way we finance events.
The cake was good, sir.
Right. In any case, there's still a little bit of cake left, and I'd really like us all to give Kent a warm round of applause.
Thank you very much for
I'm going to ask everybody who's sitting facing that way, you over there, if you would stand up and fold up your chairs and move them against the wall, because Kent's going to progress to the little wooden table behind you. As soon as they're all out of the way,